Acustica Audio have released a substantial update to its L-Ray compressor plugin. Created in conjunction with Studio DMI and multi-Grammy Award-nominated producer, songwriter, musician, and mixing engineer Greg Wells, this piece of software promises to deliver on the sound of one of Greg's special hardware weapons, his vintage RCA BA6A. Today, I'm going to see how it sounds on pretty much everything that I record. However, since this is the Fritz Coma Music Creation channel, first we gotta make some music.
Needed to fill the ocean inside of your soul. After all, we're tearing out pages, just ripping up the fabric of it all, searching to start again.
Alright, so as most songs go, I've got my intro and my verse. Next, I'm gonna need a pre-chorus or just a little transitional bar or two before diving into the chorus, which I haven't decided on yet. So nothing else has been written. So right here is what you just heard. Of course, what you did hear is the final result after I already processed and mixed all the tracks. So let's see how L-Ray was used on as many instruments as possible for this new track of mine. So L-Ray 2 comprises two separate plugins, a brand new stereo version, which allows for mid-side processing, and the one over here looks like the first one. However, I guess they've redesigned the graphics. Also, you can access Acustica's new Hyper technology inside the plugin, or you could use the standard. The Hyper is the default. I almost exclusively used the stereo version and just use the other one for mono tracks. So let's focus on the stereo version's interface. It's pretty straightforward, but as most Acustica audio plugins go, there's definitely some cryptic nature to it. You can ignore the red check section of the meter because that's for checking plate voltages of the tubes, of which there are obviously none in this piece of software. You can also ignore where it says heater for the same reason. This was used to test a filament on the hardware unit. So basically, you just watch your gain reduction on these meters. Other than that, the controls make sense. You have your standard input gain with an auto gain switch next to it. Engaging this switch allows for no perceived level change from the input to the output, meaning that if I crank this input knob, then the output level won't get extremely loud also, but rather it will automatically inversely come down as the input level rises. So basically, this will always be on as far as I'm concerned. Over here on the right, you have a left and right or mid-side switch, which allows to process the mid signal and the side signal. Control link just links the left and right channels. You have a fancy looking power switch, a continually variable stereo link knob, typical output knob. I'll focus on this debumpify knob last. Then you have your standard attack and release controls, as well as your makeup gain after compression. A nice wet and dry knob for instant parallel compression, a low-end filter to allow the compressor to ignore the frequencies below the selected number, a threshold knob which obviously controls the level at which compression starts to take place, and last but not least, the most welcome change to L-Ray in my opinion, the debumpify knob. This knob allows the option to reduce or remove the low-frequency preamp sonics of the original unit. The manual says that this is particularly useful for the mix bus and mastering purposes through bypassing the bump on the preamp. However, since I'm attempting to use this on as many sources as I can today, not having this option would require some precision EQing on my end otherwise. So now let's focus on where I used L-Ray. To start, let's look at the drum tracks. I have the kick drum mic, the snare drum, rack tom, floor tom, and a stereo pair of overheads that I've mixed down into one track so that I can process them at the same time without routing them to a separate bus. Then I have printed effects of the drum room and the snare reverb. The only reason I did that is to free up some CPU usage. Even though the processor usage has gotten better in version 2 of El-Ray, when you're mixing with Acustica audio plugins in general, you're going to end up bouncing a lot of tracks down or freezing the majority of your session tracks to avoid running out of processing headroom. So I put El-Ray on the toms, both of them, and then I did a parallel compression track with it, and then I put it on the overall drum bus. The toms, it's basically just thickening up a little bit. What is more interesting is why I chose to use it on both the parallel compression bus and the overall drum bus. I usually don't compress the overall drum bus, especially because I also added this on the master bus. However, even though this was an experiment, the cumulative effect of using multiple instances of this plugin gave a cohesion to the mix that you usually don't find unless you're using a specific console emulation. But in this case, I didn't have to go there. So up next, we have the bass guitar. And really all I'm using El-Ray for here is some mild parallel compression, even though there's some significant gain reduction going on. I only have it blended in to 30%. I have the debumpify all the way up, so it's not adding any of those low frequency sonics. Instead, I got those from the preamp, the Gold 5 preamp emulation and a tape emulation, which both of them significantly fattened up the signal enough so that El-Ray could just do its part as a straight up compressor. Okay, so after the bass guitar, we have our electric guitars, and I did not use El-Ray on these. The reason being is that I wanted the lightning fast nature of an FET compressor, so instead I used Nickel, which is Acustica Audio's emulation of the 1176. So as much as I tried, it just wasn't the right tool for the job. You can hear those heavy strums, those kind of 80s style stabs, if you will. What I could have done, I could have used El-Ray and then a saturator after it to catch those peaks, or even the Slate Digital Transient Shaper that I recently reviewed here. But, you know, the 1176 is hard to resist when it comes to guitars like this. Okay, next up, I have a stereo bounce down of two Ebow guitars. And for those who don't know, the Ebow is this little thing that you saw in the video. And basically it just creates what I think is a magnetic field between your guitar pickup and this, and it vibrates the string to make it sound like a different type of stringed instrument, or even a synth. And I did use El-Ray on this because it added that nice thickness, and it took away some of that harsher mid-range. All right, so next up we have the lead vocal, and I just made the lead and then the double, and then I just moved the double around a little bit to sync up with the lead a little bit better. I didn't use auto align or anything like that. I find that it's quick enough just to do it by hand. And then I just printed the vocal delay and the vocal space, which is the vocal reverb. And here's how that sounds.
Lying beneath blue streets, we'll start again. Tearing out the pages from the worn sun, sitting at the top of your mind.
Now, what I liked about El-Ray on the voice is that it helps keep the vocal present without being harsh. Before it, I have the also excellent Acustica Straw EQ, and that's pushing some mid-range and upper frequencies into it. And without El-Ray as sort of a pillowy safety net, it would have sounded too harsh. All right, then after that, we just have a tambourine and a synthetic clap track created with Superior Drummer 3. I did not get too self-indulgent and use L-Ray on those. It was not required. Okay, so as far as audio tracks go, I have the L-Ray on the rack tom, the floor tom, the bass guitar, the Ebow tracks, and the lead vocal. Then on the buses, I have it used as a drum parallel compressor and just a little knockback on the overall drum bus. But wait, we're not finished. I also have it on the main stereo out. However, it's not doing any compression. It's just an overall color box. It's just adding its character to the overall mix. As much as I tried, I still, in the end, would rather have my tried and true SSL style bus compressor. This specifically being a third party made for Nebula 4. It's the Tim P L-Bus comp. When you're really looking for that sound, nothing else is going to substitute that. However, using L-Ray for its tone in this overall situation gave the mix a nice cohesion that I otherwise would have had to get through some kind of console emulation. Anyways, this experiment worked out pretty well in my estimation. But what do you think? Is this song coming along nicely? Does it sound good to you? Would you have perhaps mixed some of the elements together differently than I did? I'm really interested in knowing what you think. Regardless, if you're interested in getting L-Ray or any Acustica audio plugin for that matter, as a general rule, if it's outside of the initial release period where they offer you a pretty substantial discount, they do have some pretty awesome end of the year sales around Christmas. But under most circumstances, this is a pretty awesome plugin to have access to. And with that, I just want to say thank you for tuning in. And if you've taken something useful away from this video, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stuff. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.